So the purpose of this video, is to give future ACRs and ranger trainers who are going to be teaching this course the material to be able to be consistent with what we taught this year in 2019. Keep that training consistent for years to come. Now things might change, but for now we have gone through the 130 people have gone through the ACCERT course. We want to be consistent moving forward. So made this video so future people can train consistently. So we'll start out, I'm going to go through the course as we teach it now and maybe give a little explanation as to why we teach the way we're doing it this year. So first and foremost, we start with safety. And we talk about how the axe is a tool, not a toy, right? Don't necessarily spend too much time on this topic, banking on people being intelligent enough to be able to grasp that concept. So then what we do talk about is the two main injuries that come from wielding an axe and doing the things that we'll be doing. First and foremost, the major injury is a back injury, upper back or lower back, caused by improper technique. This is usually kind of a shocker to some people. Most people assume that you're going to have a leg injury from improper technique, which is the second most common injury. But both of those can be eliminated by practicing proper technique, which we talk about in this course. So I emphasize that to people as we start out, that both of those major injuries can be alleviated by practicing the proper technique. So then we go over blood circle. Okay, this is something as scouts everybody is familiar with a knife. So then we don't just take the handle, we go 10 feet. Tell them to go 10 feet, which is about the width of our axe yard here. You have all people if you're cutting in an area, they need to be 10 feet away from you when you're cutting. And then you also, I call it a blood bubble. Rather than just a blood circle, we also need to check what's above us as well. So being able to take the axe, sweeping over us to make sure that we're not going to hit any trees, any branches, anything that we shouldn't be cutting. So once we check our blood bubble, then we can focus on our stance. Okay. Now with our stance, we'll come up to our log, pick the spot that we're going to be cutting on. Okay. So we're going to be focusing on making a narrow V cut, not a U cut as you see here, but more of a narrow V cut that started here. So demonstrate some of our cutting techniques as we're going in. To start out, I focus on their stance with their legs. We actually have our rangers start out on their knees this year. That makes them focus on their hands. So we'll go with the knee stance first, and then we'll go up to their legs. So we have them start this way because we want them to take swings in what I call an invisible box. That box extends from their shoulders out and up. Okay. A lot of people tend to come in and cut from a side. We're not trying to fell trees. We're trying to cut narrow V's, right, on our log. So they need to bring both their hands overhead, and then they put a little bit of an angle on that cut. So as they come in, they're making this motion, okay? Overhead, both hands in that box here, right? So we have them demonstrate that cut, going left and right. And once they can demonstrate staying in that box, then we have them stand up. That focuses on them making the proper cuts in the proper way with their hands. Now we can focus on their stance, where they're going to be bending their knees. Our goal with stance and bending our knees is to keep the handle parallel to the ground as we come in here. Okay? That does two things. First and foremost is safety. So if we're coming down and keeping it parallel to the ground, it eliminates the potential for this to happen. See how if I do this, that handle is not parallel to the ground. But if I bring it here, even if it bounces, it's in the dirt. It's important to have that handle parallel to the ground as we're cutting. And the second thing is, if we come down at an angle, we're only utilizing a quarter, maybe half of our blade. Whereas if we come down parallel, we're maximizing our blade coverage on that cut. So focusing on accuracy and precision first and foremost Power just comes naturally after that. We got to start slow. Had a gentleman today who, as soon as he started rushing things, his accuracy went out the window. But when he slowed down, took his time, focused on his cut and precision, his accuracy skyrocketed, and he was able to progress much better throughout the rest of that class. So focus on precision and accuracy before power. Have them slow down, have them take good timed cuts. So one other thing that people tend to do, I've seen in this class at least, is with their hands. So I tell people to make the cut and then come back to a reset position where your hand is at the top, right under the axe head. Call this the reset position, and then put your arms in a swing, okay? We don't wanna go here, here, here. It's a little too stiff, okay? And it uses more back muscles than you need to. You wanna use almost all arm. So you're swinging, going into a swinging motion as you come in. Reset. Okay? Make sure as they're bringing their hands down, they start that downswing. That's where a lot of your power comes from. So as you're pushing that axe handle forward with this hand, you're adding a little bit of force on it, and then you're bringing your hands together as you're meeting the wood. Okay, and this is a solid grip. Now, one thing that I teach is that the anchor hand, whatever hand is on the bottom, if you're left or right-handed, that anchor hand is a solid grip all the time. This is what I've called the emergency brake. If, for whatever reason, your axe chooses to bounce or go in a weird direction, or you forget to bend your knees enough, that's your last line of defense and braking for your axe going in a direction you don't want it to go into, mainly into your ankle. So a good grip on your anchor hand, and then as you come down into that cut, you bring both your hands together and do a solid grip with both hands. So that's gonna lead to a higher accuracy rate as well. What you find is some people, if they stop too early, that'll pull the axe in a weird direction, or you lose power as well. This maximizes power and accuracy to be able to squat into your cut, swing through your box, and bring both your hands together. Those are the key points that I focus on when I'm teaching this course and looking for in the practical. And I look for people to demonstrate both a right angle and a left angle cut, to be able to come in and add a right angle to their axe head. And then to be able to do a counter cut as well to the left. Not straight up and down, as a lot of folks tend to do. Starting out, we want to be able to get counter cuts. And there's two ways to tell if people are doing good counter cuts. First way is if you're making a good left angle cut, then you're going to be seeing chips fly to the right. And if you're making a good right angle cut, you're going to see chips flying to the left. Another way to tell that you're making good angle cuts is the sound that the wood makes as you're coming down. If you're coming straight up and down, you'll tend to hear a dull thud. And that dull thud means that you don't have enough angle, or you're hitting basically a dead part of the wood. This happens a lot if you're chopping into a V cut, and you're hitting the base and there's nothing more to be done in that base. Usually that means that you need to adjust your cut or widen your cut. Next thing that we're focusing on, once they kind of demonstrate the bending of the knees, your angle cuts, is rather than have them, I guess I should say, watch for people that tend to, rather than squat, that tend to lean in their cuts. They'll lean into your cuts. This is another way that people will hurt their lower backs as they cut. So what we want to watch is, or encourage them to do, is squat, but then also to take a step. I keep my feet planted and move them once. So I will make a cut with my feet planted. I will draw that line halfway from the halfway point on the log to the end of the log. So I'll sit here and make cuts here, and then I'll take a half step forward and then go from that halfway point to the top of the log. Okay, the more you move your feet, the more inaccurate you'll be. So being able to be consistent in how you move, engaging that distance, will go a long way to help that accuracy. So I move my feet half, and then I tackle the top half of the log. Okay, so that's the main key points that you're looking for. We're not looking to make them, they're not going to go out and become lumberjacks after this class. This class is to focus on a basic safety level across the board for rangers wishing to carry this axe into the backcountry, and a basic skill level to be able to do the three things that we want them to do in the backcountry with this axe. Those three things that I tell crews, we have a priority list. One is facilitating a crew campfire experience. When we go to trail camps, even backcountry camps, right now there is tons of dead wood around campsites. That was the main purpose behind us bringing this Ranger axe to Philmont, was to help chop that wood and create those campfire experiences that help crews bond. With that, almost tied hand in hand, but a second level priority is by chopping up that wood, we create a defensible space here at Philmont. We create an area that's not going to burn as heavily. So that's our second priority, is creating that defensible space. And then our third priority is chopping logs that are across the trail that fall within our CERT, which we'll talk about in just a second. That's our third priority. And I emphasize to crews that, or to our rangers, that their crew comes first in regards to chopping logs. It's awesome to get to chop a log, but our first priority is to our crew. So if we come across a log while we're with a crew, we're not gonna whip out our axe and cut that log. Tell them, go ahead and take a 20-minute break. We're gonna cut this log real quick. No. Now, if you can delimb that log so that they can step over that log and facilitate an experience for that crew, absolutely. Pull out that axe. That's our main priority though, is facilitating crew experience. Servant leadership is attached to this axe at every turn, okay? You can cut that log when you return from your crew or on a day off. That log's probably not going anywhere. So those are our three priorities in regards to use of the axe. So once I demonstrate chopping and going through this process, I then usually give each of the people in the class, there's usually only 5 in the class, max of 5. I give them each 5 to 10 minutes depending on their skill level. Some people are able to demonstrate their skill level in 2 minutes, and I just move them along. If they have been able to demonstrate that skill level, move on to somebody else, because inevitably in every class you have somebody who needs a little more focus and attention and critiquing. So once you have brought everybody through, start them out on their knees to be able to demonstrate that arm movement. And once they do that, they can stay in that box, put them to their feet, have them work through counter cuts, left and right cuts, demonstrating the proper motions with their legs and arms. Make sure they can still stay in that box when they're standing up. And then move them through. And once everybody has gone through, then we move on to talking about care and maintenance. So in care and maintenance right now, we don't have a course set up to teach that. Unfortunately, we just verbally go through this, but hopefully in coming years we can have the opportunity to teach care and maintenance of the axe. So there's 4 different parts to the care and maintenance of an axe. And I start with sharpening the blade, okay? We recommend the Lansky Axe Puck. It's a circular disc with a rough and a smooth side to it. And all you simply do for sharpening your blade is just make circles along the blade on both sides, making sure you're sharpening it evenly. We also telling people that there are videos on YouTube that they can watch to learn how to sharpen it. Until we can demonstrate that, that's the best we have to offer as far as showing them and teaching them how to sharpen their blade. I do tell them that, recommend that they sharpen their blade at the end of the day that they've used their Ranger axe. Okay, think about 15 minutes to sharpen an axe after using it for, say, an hour of chopping. 15-20 minutes of good solid sharpening time to get it back to where it was. Now if you go a week using your axe every day, that 15 and 20 minutes adds up to a point where you probably can't get it back to that sharpness with just a little hand puck. You're going to need a file, you're going to need a grindstone, which takes a lot more work, and it's not necessarily a resource that we have readily available here at Philmont. So encourage them to sharpen their axe regularly. The next thing I talk about is the axe head. I tell them that rust is embarrassing and that they need to keep this oiled and dry. Now inevitably when taking out a crew, it's going to get wet, you're going to get rained on, and so I tell them to keep it dry as best they can, and then oil it every chance they get. Usually WD-40 does just fine for that. Now we also have a leather sheath that goes over the edge of this. That leather sheath does dry out very fast down here in New Mexico. So finding a leather oil or a boot oil works just fine to keep that oiled up. And then finally putting linseed oil on the handle to help moisturize it and keep it from cracking once again in this dry environment. So I go over those 4 items with them, suggesting that they have those available almost before they buy the axe, so that way they can go immediately into the proper care and maintenance of the axe. So then we go from there into talking about the actual cert. So I'm going to go ahead and grab what I read for them. I usually have it on a little clipboard because there's some things that we usually have them sign. And so for our cert, what we have is 8-inch cert of what we're allowed to cut as rangers with the Ranger axe. We've talked with conservation, and conservation has graciously given us some things to cut, and that is limited to an 8-inch cert. The nice thing is we have a visual to go along with that as well, and that's a Nalgene. A Nalgene from top to bottom is 8 inches, okay? So being able to take a Nalgene and holding it up to a log to see if it's that thickness, and being able to hold it up and say, yes, that's in my cert, and yes, that's in my cert, or no. Being able to have that visual so you don't have to take a tape measure and you're not guessing on the overall thickness. So 8 inches is our cert, what we're allowed to cut. Now, if we come to a tree like this on the trail, what we're allowed to cut, once again, with cons, what they have asked us to do with the logs is to, for example, if this is our critical edge here, and this is our upslope edge, they've asked us to try to make one cut and then move the tree across the trail, move it off the trail. And that first cut is 2 to 3 feet above the upslope. So if we go to that upslope, go 2 or 3 feet off the trail and make that cut, make that narrow V cut, and try to move the tree off the trail. Now, if you have to make another cut, a second cut, then you come to the critical edge. And right now, conservation makes one solid cut right on the critical edge to emphasize and protect that critical edge. So what they've asked us to do is, once again, make our narrow V cut right on that critical edge to make it, once again, to emphasize and protect that critical edge, making sure that it's not going to have any sharp, jagged points sticking into the trail. It's going to grab people by the leg or the backpack as they're walking by, but helps protect and emphasize that critical edge, and then move that piece off the trail. I tell people when we're going through this, at this point, that if you start cutting something, you finish cutting it. We usually try to give them a good demonstration with the log that we have here on how long it takes to cut through something of your cert. If your accuracy and proficiency are where they need to be, shouldn't take you more than 20 minutes to make one cut. But then again, sometimes that depends on the log type or your experience as well. So be mindful that if you start something, you need to finish it. So that's our first cert bit. The next thing that we talk to them about in the cert is if you come to a log that's outside of your cert. Let's say it's above that 8 inches. What you're allowed to do at that point in time is to delimb the log. Now, haven't been able to find too many logs with branches sticking out of it. That's been kind of a hard part of the demonstration process. And so what we've done is usually try to find a knob like this on the log and demonstrate cutting and making a V cut on it to be able to delimb that tree. If that's out of your cert, that's all that we're allowed to do is delimb it as far as cuts go. And then we leave it up to each ranger, if they deem it necessary. They can do what's called a U cut, which is this right here. And they can make a step pretty much. If it would help, once again, facilitate crew experience by helping the crew pass over that log, they are allowed to cut in a step. Not all the way through, but a step. Once again, emphasize to them that they don't need to cut a step in a log that's up to somebody's waist. They cut a step in if it's directly on the trail and will assist that crew in getting over that obstacle. So those are the 2 things that you're allowed to do to a log that's outside of your cert on the trail. Once again, emphasize making it look good. Rule number 1, with everything that we do with this axe, let's make it look good. So the next thing that we talk about in our cert is no cutting of any vertical growth, dead or alive. So felling is a whole another skill set, tons of fun to do with an axe, not something that we're going to be doing with the Ranger axe here at Philmont. So make sure you emphasize that to folks. Even a tree that's what's called a snag or a hang up, something that's sideways, that's still considered vertical growth. They're not allowed to mess with that. Once again, felling is a whole another skill set and bag of worms, and it can be very unsafe and dangerous if you're not skilled in it. So that is against the rules and one of our unbreakable rules that we'll talk about here at the end. So in regards to the cert, that's about the extent of what we're allowed to cut. In the backcountry, one of the other little things they've asked us not to mess with is any sort of loose branches that come over the trail. Axes don't make good clean cuts on branches like live branches, so they've asked us to stay away from that. But in regards to what we're allowed to cut, 8 inches is our cert, and using that Nalgene as the visual is a great tool to use. So once we have talked about all of that, then we go to expectations and the rules that people can't break with their cert. Expectations, the 3 things that I usually, or the 2 things that I usually talk about is humble pride and servant leadership. I usually mention to the Rangers that they know what they had to do to get this axe. Going through their advanced cert, going through an axe cert course as well. Being able to take that much time and devote it to just getting an axe is enough. They don't need to brag about it. They don't need to talk about it. All they need to do is carry that axe around. That's all they need to say and do. Let their actions show. And then I talk about servant leadership, about how we have the opportunity as Rangers to serve not only our crews, once again facilitating crew experience with this axe, but also serve the ranch in creating those defensible spaces and clearing trail when we have that opportunity. So once I talk to them about that, then I go into the rules and regulations. This is something that I have every Ranger sign once they have gone through the course. Oh, geez. All right. So I read these 9 rules to them, and if they agree to follow these rules, then they get to put their name on here saying they agree to them, and they get their axe cert card after this. So the first rule is axes will be carried sheathed only to and from the backcountry. Axes will not be carried around base camp. So this rule is fairly, I feel, common sense oriented. Usually we tell Rangers that if you're going to be going to the backcountry, that you put the axe on your backpack. Put it in the side pocket, put it in the back pocket. You don't need to carry it to the Welcome Center because you're not going to be chopping anything at the Welcome Center. Make sure that you're putting your axe on your backpack. Now, if you're carrying it to the parking lot, carry it safely, carry it next to your body. Don't carry it over your shoulder, don't carry it unsheathed. There's no reason for you to be doing that. Have had a few rangers ask about carrying their axe to the branding station by the trading post. That is perfectly fine as long as you're carrying it safely, and always sheathed. With the loose sheath, emphasize at this point, if they lose that sheath, they can't take it anywhere. It stays in their tent, and they can order another sheath from Holtzbrook. The next rule is no cutting of limbs or trees more than 8 inches. We talked about that with our cert. The next rule is no chopping of any vertical growth, dead or alive. Once again, emphasize the hang-ups. A lot of people don't think about that as vertical growth. Axes will not be left unattended while unsheathed is the next rule. I usually tell people that the farthest you can go away from your axe unsheathed is this axe yard that we're in. This gives them a good visual to know the distances that they're allowed to go away from that axe if they're working to clear or move some stuff to chop. The next one is on trails. Blown down trees over 8 inches out of their cert will only be delimbed and a notch placed on the downhill side of a log as a step. So going back to delimbing things that are outside of our cert and placing that step to be able to assist and facilitate crew experience by helping them over that log. The next one is eye protection of some kind must be worn when using an axe. Now we make it mandatory that you wear sunglasses and boots. This kind of goes to the safety portion at the start of our course. Sunglasses or prescription glasses are fine. They don't need to be safety blades, and they do need to be just a closed-toed shoe, no chacos, no sandals. We focus on technique. Technique is going to save us from injuries, not having reinforced shoes or chaps. Those might help, but it's technique in the end that emphasizes that safety. The next note on the rules and regulations is if others request to hold a ranger's axe, that ranger is responsible for how those others use said axe. When talking about this rule, I emphasize to every ranger that they have all gone through the same safety course across the board, and we have taught each and every one of them, and they have demonstrated the safety technique in chopping, in bending of the knees and that technique. Not everybody at Philmont has gone through that same safety course. There are plenty of people here who have probably used an axe more than a lot of the rangers have. That does not mean that they know how to safely use that axe and are held to the standard that we're holding rangers. So we've told rangers if another ranger asks to hold the axe or somebody else asks to hold their axe, that is perfectly fine. But they cannot use that axe until that ranger sees their axe cert card, ranger axe cert card. That demonstrates a baseline of safety. And this also holds true for any other department, specifically backcountry, some of the camps that have experience on a more regular basis chopping wood for their fires, for their stoves. Even if they have that experience, it doesn't mean that they've been doing it safely. They don't go through an axe safety training course like we do. They don't have to demonstrate a safety baseline. So even if they have been doing it longer than you, unless you see that safety card, you're not allowed to let somebody else use your ranger axe. One of the main points being this axe says ranger on it. And if somebody was to injure themselves because they haven't gone through the same safety course, that's on us. They can be from any different department, but that axe says ranger on it. It's going to come back to us. So make sure you're emphasizing this point. The next point is participants are never allowed to use a ranger's axe. I tell the rangers that this is to use the axe as a teachable moment. Once again, emphasizing servant leadership. We use this axe as a means to serve a crew and as a means to serve the ranch. Use it in that way, once again, as a tool. So the last point on rules and regulations is rangers will be expected to provide all items necessary for axe upkeep and maintenance. It is my hope in the future that we have some resources available for rangers in the RO, from axe pucks to the different oils necessary to take care of that axe. But right now, and also in the future, rangers are only here for 3 months. So there's 9 more months out of the year that they need to be able to take care of their axe. So encouraging them to buy those items and then not depend on the ranger department for those items is something that we emphasize. At this point, once I tell them all the rules, and I talk to them about two more things. One, I tell them that in our day and age, unfortunately, one person can affect a whole community. And in a ranger community where, as of right now, the end of 2019, we have 100 rangers with a ranger axe. Hopefully we have hundreds more that get this ranger axe. One person can ruin our opportunity to take this into the backcountry and continue to practice that servant leadership. So it's very important that each and every person who has this ranger cert holds each other accountable to the things that they learned in this safety course. So if you see, I tell the rangers that if they see a fellow ranger or somebody with the axe cert doing something that they know they shouldn't be doing because they've all been through the same course, if they see them doing something they shouldn't be doing, an unsafe practice, to address it then and there. And then if that other individual continues to practice those unsafe techniques, to then bring it to your RT, who will pass it up the chain of command. As of right now, only the chief ranger and the ACRs can revoke an axe cert. Once you lose your axe cert, you're done for that summer, the rest of that summer, and cannot get another axe cert until the following year, in which you have to start the process all over again of getting advanced and your ranger axe cert. If somebody, right now we have the rule in place that if somebody chooses to continue to carry their axe in the backcountry after losing their cert, that there will be further consequences passed down by the chief ranger depending on that situation. I really emphasize these rules and regulations and that it is a one and done. One mistake, one breaking of these rules will get you and your axe cert revoked. All right? We have the opportunity to practice splitting wood here, and I encourage rangers to do that because it helps focus them on their accuracy. But it's not something that I'm usually able to incorporate into our hour-long cert course. I usually say if you have time afterwards, we can go over that and you can get practice in that realm. Not everybody takes that opportunity, but it is something that I encourage them to do on their own time. We usually have an axe available in the ranger office if they don't already have their axe cert. I hope this was beneficial. Please feel free to reach out to me. My number should be somewhere in the ranger office. Thank you guys. You want one of this?
Look at that.
All right, so one of the other things that we talk about, and sometimes we have the opportunity to teach in a course, a lot of times we run out of time in the course to be able to teach splitting wood, but we're going to talk about it here, so hopefully we can add that in at a later date, maybe as a more advanced skill that people can practice in a different course or CT. So one of the things to talk about in this point as far as safety goes, and this applies to safety overall, is you want to make sure when you're making your cuts that you don't have somebody directly in front of your cut. You could possibly lose your grip on your axe for whatever reason. Your hands could be sweaty. You might not have a good grip on it. And then also, for whatever reason, potentially your head could come off if you're unaware of what's going on as far as your wedge, or it becomes loose. Kind of a good rule of thumb though, just to not have anybody directly in front of you when you're cutting in case of one of those incidents happening. So let's talk about splitting real quick. When you're splitting logs, a lot of times it's not something you have the opportunity to do too much at Philmont. We have a lot of wood that could be split, but what we don't have is a good base. Like this log here, to place the logs on and be able to get a good level cut, and also have something solid to have the axe go into after it cuts. And we don't want people cutting logs on the ground. That's usually the main hindrance when we're splitting wood. But I do encourage people to come into our axe yard to practice their accuracy with splitting. So once again, going back to our safety, our technique and the safety that comes with that is bending your knees, starting there. And then a lot of people will try to gauge their cut with the split, and they'll extend their arms all the way out, or they'll extend it all the way in. You don't really want to do that. You want to find that sweet spot right in front of you with your knees bent, where your axe is going to hit here. Now this is one of the spots where if you over cut with your axe, you can damage this handle bit. That's where you see a lot of handle damage, is from people not knowing how to split properly. But if they are able to measure it here, this is a good learning that depth perception as well. Once you have that, going into your stance and following through, you want to have that handle once again parallel to the ground all the way through that log. Encouraging people to cut things into fourths. Cutting the log into fourths. So this would be a half. Cutting it one more time makes a good size of wood that we can burn around campfires with our crews. Okay, so square up, get that gauge, learn that distance, and squat into that cut.